as a citizen of this country, to stand up for what I believe in.
On September 17th, the grassroots expression of contempt was launched in the heart of the world's financial center in Lower Manhattan of New York, also commonly known to the world as the Institution of Wall Street. As of September 26th, there have been over 800 arrests, and as of October, more than 800, and many recorded instances of what appears to be violence and abuse coming from the police and security forces there. However, the protesters remain vigilant in what could very well be a landmark event that will resonate for some time to come. The Zeitgeist Movement would like to extend its public support to this basic expression. As the world awakens to a failing financial system with growing civil unrest emerging without the bias of sovereignty, religion, or political loyalty, a new unifying perspective is slowly taking hold, which transcends the framework many of us falsely assume as empirical to our way of life. With the slow grind down of the global workforce as machine automation continues to replace human labor for the benefit of corporate cost efficiency, simultaneously reducing purchasing power and hence inevitably stifling so-called economic growth. With ever-expanding debt crisis born out of the fractional reserve lending system and the simple reality that money is created out of debt and sold as a commodity in exchange for interest that can only again come into existence through more loan sales, with the looming military programs growing in virtually all major powers as the financial crisis, coupled with a pending hydrocarbon energy crisis, begins to suggest a stage of global conflict possibly never before seen, along with market psychology of infinite growth consumption that continues to pervade and distort our values, and what it means to live in harmony with nature on a finite planet. It might be time we begin to see the social problems at hand are not specific to any general policy, administration, or even so-called corporate greed. The real problem at hand is actually systemic via the very core foundation of what defines our economic system and the psychology that is supported and rewarded. The historical illusion that continues to this day is that someone or some group is explicitly to blame. Rather than focus on the 400 people who have more wealth than 150 million in America, or the fact that globally 1% of the world's population has more wealth than 40%, let's instead ask ourselves how such a manifestation is even possible, and, more critically, why we would expect anything less. Think about it. After all, it's the free market, isn't it? Contrary to the statistically void efficiency assumptions made by most market economists, the free market simply means anyone can do whatever they want and maximize however they want within the confines of legal legislation. Legislation which, make no mistake, is also for sale in the free market as well, as are political officials, regulatory institutions, and whatever social entity you wish to consider. Nothing but maximizing monetary gain is sacred, and any time a person or group brings some detrimental social or environmental consequence of this system to the forefront, pejorative distinctions are usually branded upon their forehead to stifle such concern and frighten other detractors, such as being called a socialist or communist. Furthermore, while people in protest today across the world continue to condemn monetary influence in social dealings, such as the legal reality of corporate lobbying, even using such colorful terms as corporatism, crony capitalism, and even fascism, they seem to misunderstand what this system is and always has been. The free market model of economics is a haphazard, unscientific anarchy of organization, which assumes that any person or group with enough money and hence power will be responsible in their actions both socially and environmentally. The problem is that the very definition of being financially responsible actually means to be socially and environmentally exploitative, manipulative, and negligent, for the main driver of this system is inefficiency. The more problems in society in general, the more jobs are created and the more rich the upper 1% become. There is an empirical decoupling from what actually supports life and no alteration of the core configuration of the money market incentive will likely change that. On a different level, this system as a historical evolution is actually based on a culturally hegemonic pretense. Once economic advantage is obtained, it will likely be kept. This is why everything in the system favors the wealthy by its general structure and inherent logic. While the public might complain about the fact that top hedge fund managers bring in over $300 million a year each, they often do not find objection with an interest system that rewards those with high deposits and essentially taxes those using credit. While you may buy your home with a loan, paying thousands in interest a year, a person of wealth can make a CD investment and gain free interest income simply because they have the money to spare. Class separation and perpetuation and the growing wealth divide is not a byproduct. It is inevitable. In the free market, one is actually free to take away the liberty of others through the mere economic pressures generated from the game. You are only as free as the size of your wallet. The term institutional racism was coined by civil rights activist Stokely Carmichael in the 1960s, referring to how often unnoticed underlying policies and structures within the social system undermined African American prosperity and equality. What we have today is a mere variation, institutional classism. Wall Street itself, which is with its ultimate manifestation of the pursuit of money as a commodity rather than any form of true creation or social contribution, is naturally ripe as an entity for symbolic objection, for at a minimum it shouldn't exist at all, and most certainly not have the grand effect it does on the stability of the global economy today, regardless of the inherent shortcomings denoted. However, that stated, it must again be made clear that Wall Street and the banking system are not the source of our problems. They are only symptoms of an economic system which will continue to fail by the very gravity of its outdated and false assumptions of human conduct and environmental relationships. The question then becomes, what do we put in its place?
I swear, as a citizen of this country, to not just sit around bitching and moaning. I swear, as a citizen of this country, to take action if action be needed. I swear, as a citizen of this country, to realise that the power is with us and no one else. I will not move, I will not change. I will not bend or play their games. I will stand tall with a full frame. I will take pride, I will stake a claim. I will not move, I will not change. I will not bend or play their games. I will stand tall with a full frame. I will take pride, I will stake a claim. I will not move, I will not change. I will not bend or play their games. I will stand tall with a full frame. I will take pride, I will stake a claim. I will not move, I will not change. I will not bend or play their games. I will stand tall with a full frame. I will take pride, I will stake a claim. 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 I will stake a claim.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you out there. This is Ben McLeish of the Zeitgeist Movement UK, and welcome to the Wednesday, October 26th radio show, amid the protests that are raging around the world and with the slow grind of everything that we speak about slowly just beginning to happen. What a fascinating couple of weeks it has been. In fact, it's been a fascinating month or so since the Occupy Wall Street movement erupted into a global, decentralized 1,500 occupation of the world's financial districts and related areas. More on that in a second. First off, I wanted to do some website news and some general news for the Zeitgeist Movement, what's been going on in the last week or two. First off, as you will probably have noticed, we have a new Zeitgeist Movement global website that went live this week. There is a feed into Zeit News that will be coming to bring in and sort of federate in that technology news that we like to cover, all of the solutions that we always talk about. That'll be coming. The UK chapter site went live as well. There's a new site for that went around. That's the zeitgeistmovementuk.com. Very, very nice, very stylish, I think, as well. So that's up there now too, featuring a couple of blogs from myself and others to, focus on news and events as well as the rationale for what we term a resource-based economy. Okay, so some news that is related to the Occupy movement. Obviously, as everyone will have seen who's watching the news, the New York movement continues to grow where it all started from ever since the Adbusters call went out to Occupy Wall Street back in August for the September start. That's grown, and so is, of course, the policing. It is interesting to watch just how brutal the police have been to the unarmed, non-violent protesters. It really throws into sharp relief some of the comments made by the US government with respect to how the Iranians or how the Libyans should be treating their population, i.e. asking them to deal with the population according to the generally accepted human rights and respect afforded to every human on this planet, whilst presiding over a general structure that beats up and maces unarmed women protesters or arrests 700 people at once under the Brooklyn Bridge. It is entertaining, to say the least, if not very depressing. Nevertheless, they are now fully ensconced in Zuccotti Park with medical tents and a kitchen, a fully functioning kitchen with free food and Wi-Fi and all the rest of it. What is interesting to see is that the police have tried and failed to seize the medical tent, which is pretty pernicious if you really think about it, and pretty brutal and quite cynical to go for that. And it is interesting that in parallel movements in the UK, for example, where we also now have Occupy movements in St. Paul's and in Finsbury Square, that kind of action hasn't been seen. And I put that down to two elements, really. For one, we have healthcare in this country. So, we don't need a medical tent, not in the direct sense. And, of course, there is a general behavioral difference, I think, between the police that we see over here and the police in the US. And so I do hope that everybody in New York is all right and can continue to be non-violent and passive in their resistance while facing up to such brutality and distortion. Couple of other points. Although our movement is separate from Occupy in the sort of direct sense, we have, however, helped set up some of the Occupies that are going on around the world. Two in particular that have also been covered by the mainstream media. Occupy Vancouver, our Canadian chapter, set that one up and helped bring together the people who wanted to protest the banking system through this occupation. And if you'll have seen the YouTube clips that were shared on Facebook, you'll have noticed that Matt Berkowitz from the Canadian chapter was actually interviewed on national television as well as a direct member of the Zeitgeist Movement, explaining where this fundamental drive to target the banking system comes from. And the other one as well, our good friends in the Amsterdam chapter have set up Occupy Amsterdam. That was also concurrent with interviews by Seth, the coordinator of the Netherlands movement, on national radio and national TV. So there's some good coverage going on there. Slowly we're getting these issues into the media, and slowly the conversation is starting to happen, which is, I think, can only be a good thing. Over in the UK, obviously it's been quite well covered now. Occupy London Stock Exchange started or attempted to start on the October the 15th. Of course, it was moved straight away to St. Paul's. St. Paul's kindly offered their space to the protesters. And so far they've been there now up until now, the 26th. So They're going strong. In fact, a second occupation in London has started in Finsbury Square, because the St Paul's guys, even after a kind of a warm beginning, have actually closed St Paul's now for the first time since World War II, which does make it seem a little bit of an overreaction, but nevertheless, it's been done, and we've set up another one just in case we were to be moved off from St Paul's with some kind of force. So those are both going very strongly. I visited the Occupy London on Thursday and Friday of last week, and it was fascinating, actually. Within 3 minutes of me arriving, the BBC arrived with the One Show, and a banker, David something or other, I can't remember his name, who was there to essentially defend the banking system. He was billed by the presenter from the One Show as a man who thinks banking is brilliant and bankers are brilliant and banks are brilliant. And of course, that's a fascinating way to start off that kind of conversation when you are dealing with people who have been seriously disaffected and seriously, directly affected by this kind of behavior that we've seen, not even just through the kind of corrupt mentalities that have broken the system, but by the actual mechanisms of the system anyway, when it's working correctly. And there's been a lot of talk, well, this system's broken and all the rest of it. It's very, very clear that the system isn't broken. This is exactly how it functions. This is what it does. And if you think any differently, then you haven't really thought about the mechanism by which money favors the rich over the poor. It's very simple, even if you were to just look at the behavior of interest on an account that's in debt versus the interest on an account that has a wealth of money that you may have inherited. The movement of money goes towards the rich. But nevertheless, this man was wheeled on, and of course everybody crowded around immediately. And this piece actually went out on, I think it was Friday, on the One Show. And what was very, very interesting was that there were two large omissions. Although there were some very brave elements that were kept in the show. There was a pink-haired mother who very clearly stated, shouldn't an economy economize, which is exactly, as we all know, precisely the opposite of what it does right now. And that was kept in. There was a brilliant rant by a lady in sunglasses who, even though she used terms like neoliberalism and corruption and all those kinds of elements that you have to translate into a real mechanism for society, a real argument for it, nevertheless, it was very, very heated and absolutely correct. It was the wholesale destruction of the system that was being addressed there. But two elements were also edited out, amongst many others. One was a fantastic screed by a gentleman who was standing just in front of me, who exclaimed very specifically, all money is generated out of debt. All money is created out of debt, and it's then fractionally lent out to everybody. That's how money gets into the system. When they talk about injecting 70 billion into the economy, they're not talking about just giving it to everyone. It's lent out at interest. And the banker was nodding away as this gentleman was speaking, and it was a fantastic root cause description of exactly what has gone wrong. And of course, it didn't appear in the program. Another enjoyable omission was one by myself. I promised to the movement about a week ago that I was really looking forward to engaging the media with the sort of direct talk about root causes. And sure enough, I got a chance. It didn't appear in the show, of course. Why would it? Where I simply looked at the banker and said, listen, there's a lot of talk here today about monetary reform and whether it was the previous government that was at fault or, some kind of, systemic failure that could be put down to people or groups or human error or human nature. And really all of that's irrelevant, because the fact is we are automating jobs. That's been true since we've had automation, since we've had any kind of technology that helps us perform work quicker and more easily than it is with bare hands. I did 2 food drops on Thursday and Friday for the kitchens at Occupy London Stock Exchange, and both times I bought my food from one of 20 automated checkout desks, a couple of hundred yards down the road. These jobs are not coming back. People who are demanding their jobs come back are barking up the wrong tree. This is not going to happen based on the logic of pursuing the greatest profit. As long as we're running after the same profit, that we have to in this system, you're going to have to produce items at a lower cost, and the best way to do that is through automation. And automation is getting more and more powerful all the time. By something like 2029, 2030, we're going to have a computer that beats the Turing test. We're going to have a computer that's cleverer than a human being. What do you invent once you've invented a machine that's cleverer than a human being? Nothing at all. You have already invented something that can invent things better than you can. And I said this to him. I said, it's not a question, it's more of a statement. Your system is coming to an end based on the logic of how it behaves, based on what we can do, based on what we are left with once we automate. And what we are left with once we automate is not enough of a job pool to sustain an economy based on employment. And there was no argument. The banker looked straight at me and said, yes, and at the same time, I'm truly worried for the future of my children. Which makes me then wonder why he has even bothered to come down to a group that is protesting the function of the system as it now stands, which is detrimental to the human race, which is detrimental to his children's future. And he understands explicitly that money is created out of a need to repay it, plus interest, debt that can never be fulfilled, that you can't bail out an infinite growth paradigm. We have finite resources, we have finite, we have finite monetary capabilities. If you're doing infinite growth, there's no such thing as infinite growth. You can't do it. It's like filling an empty, bottomless pit with all of the life goods you possibly can. Why is this gentleman here defending the banking system? I don't know how much he agreed to come along, or if he really expected to have the kind of arguments thrown back at him that were. But it was quite evident by the end that he conceded all the most important points. Money is generated out of debt. Automation does threaten the job market completely. Even if there are 20-30% of jobs that could never be automated, they're somehow magically not automatable. 70% unemployment, that's not going to sustain anything. So anyway, he had a decent grilling. I must say he was a stand-up chap by himself. There's nothing wrong with him on a personal level. But one can see that the banking system itself, if it is represented correctly through this gentleman who was brought by the BBC, do understand what the problem is. They're not just whistling in the dark. I think they do know. And the battle has been drawn. The battle lines have been drawn, and we are going to have to move out of this paradigm in hopefully the most painless, non-violent, safe way as possible. So that was very enjoyable to do. Of course, it was edited out, but it doesn't matter because our cameras were rolling for both the gentleman who was speaking about money as debt and myself. And we're going to get those arguments on YouTube. We're going to get the pieces that the BBC chose to ignore out into the media foray. And that sort of brings me on to a general point about how the media has been behaving. Ever since this month and a half of protests, which is easily the largest protest ever seen in the world, the general media blackout, the non-coverage, the replacement of this story with other stories that match what the status quo would like to cover is very telling, because it makes their entire organism completely irrelevant, because it's now no longer covering the most important story that there is, and the one that affects, as the Occupy movement like to describe it, the 99% of the people in the world who are not served by this system in a correct way. And you know what? Even the 1% that are left, look at Steve Jobs. We saw Steve Jobs died a couple of weeks ago, from a disease that if we had health technologies the way that they would really be if they weren't hampered by monetary destruction, might still be alive today. Even the billionaires are still breathing in this poisonous air that we have and eating the same kinds of foods and drinking the same kind of water. They are going to also suffer from environmental collapse. No amount of money is going to make you live in a bubble forever. So it's really, as Peter has said before, the 100%, this is all of humanity we're talking about. So, as the mainstream media choose not to cover this, and as the new social media, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Vimeo, every single way that we can cover the news, by, for, and from the street, then gradually something very interesting happens, and we see the shift in focus, the shift in not just reliability, but also the shift in validity from the old media to the new media. And it's as inevitable as the failure of the printing press as cold type was introduced in the 1930s. you can choose to not automate, or you can choose to not update whatever system you have. By not doing so, you become obsolete and you become less efficient, and you do become beaten, and you do close down. And as the mainstream media continue to propagate the same arguments and the same focus, which is a systemic preservation effort, the more they become irrelevant, the more quickly they are building the gallows for their own organizations. So anyway, that's enough on Occupy. Additionally, this week in the UK, Enter Shikari started drawing to their close of their European tour. Those guys have been going on for a couple of months now, touring around Europe. They're hot off the heels of the back of an American tour as well. And they performed 2 shows in London, in Camden, and we were there at both events and flyed the supporters of Shikari who were there. Not surprisingly, most of the people at the show had heard of us and knew who we were, and it even got to the point where people didn't want flyers because they're basically part of it anyway, which I thought was really wonderful. In fact, it's quite lovely to see the new generation coming up. I'm now no longer the newest generation by a long shot, and it's nice to see the general vibe that the new guys have, the new generation has. They are socially aware. They're more interconnected as well. You notice there's a certain general connectedness amongst these people because they've grown up with social media, and they've grown up listening to the bands in public, if you like, and there's kind of a real community spirit there. So there was a lot of that going on there as well, which is really wonderful. And Shikari played storming gigs as well. On the night that we saw them, they were so hectic and noisy that they broke the fuse of the place twice. All the fuses went, which, they cottoned on to quicker than everybody else. But, even if you're not a direct fan of their music, you got to see these guys live, man. You can really tell when a band knows what they're doing live, So that was good as well. It was very, very nice to be able to do that. And overall, I think we've flyed and been and had a presence for our movement at all of the Enter Shikari gigs, barring a few maybe. So that's been really wonderful as well. Bearing in mind that was their idea as well, that we come and support them and that we generally, produce this information in a relevant fashion to the people who are coming to listen to music that shares the same values. So it was very nice of them and very good of them to invite us to that. And it's been one of the more pleasant places to fly. I mean, how can you argue? To fly at a show with live music is always wonderful. So just a quick update on something that I did recently. I've been, over the last couple of months, trying to gather my thoughts and my research on various forms of punishment and prison system that we have in the world. The movement talks in a general sense about prison systems because we talk quite a lot about the violence that affects different societies, because in a global resource-based economy, in any kind of model like that, you must try and minimize the kind of violence that we see. A harmonious society has to be really a non-violent one, just as the protests that we see, if they're to be effective, have to be non-violent as well. And so I took it upon myself to write to a couple of prisons and see if I could get an interview and get inside and have a look around at the different forms of prison that we have. And I found one in Leoben, Austria, that is a very, very interesting kind of prison. It looks almost like a very kind of modern version of IKEA. It's a very large glass building, and it was the subject of a New York Times magazine article back in, I think, 2007 or 2008, I can't remember, which sort of showed these gleaming walls and these light, airy rooms with modern art built into the walls, and courtyards and conjugal visit rooms and this kind of stuff that makes it look like a holiday camp if you are not actually in the prison. You could see it and say, well, that doesn't look like a prison to me. And in fact, the New York Times actually made this point in the opening paragraph. They said, yeah, go on, say it. Say it looks like a holiday camp. Say that, maybe you should go to Austria and commit some crimes, and then maybe you can live it up really nicely. So I went to have a look at this prison. I wrote to the dean or the provost of the prison, and he agreed to an interview, and it even allowed me to record it, and even gave me a book which kind of covered the thinking behind why this prison was created. If you want to find it online, just Google Leoben Prison. I'll spell that for you. That's Leoben prison. If you just search that, you'll find it. And I sat down for about an hour and a half with him and the chief guard, and worked through what were the reasonings behind the architecture, and how it had worked, and what kind of prisoners go here. And it was very interesting. The prison cost about 50 million euros to build. It was built after a contract was awarded to the winner of an architecture contest for a new reconceptuation of a prison and justice facility, because they also have courtrooms built into a neighboring portion where the prisoners can be moved between the courtroom and the prison through a linking tunnel. So it was an entire sort of correctional center, including the courtroom element to it. And I said, why does it look like this? And they said, well, it's pretty obvious to us from our studies that, you have to treat human beings, even in captivity, with the same kind of rights that they have outside. You have to respect them as a human being, and you can't just punish them. Punishment is essentially violence, and you have to treat them, even in captivity, with the kind of respect that is more likely to help them reform to society and allow them the easiest way back into the society that they have strayed from. And indeed, what is quite interesting to note about the prison is that sandblasted on the walls on the outside is the statement rendered in German, but in English I'll read it. It says, "All persons deprived of their liberty shall be treated with humanity and with respect for the inherent dignity of the human person." That's from the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And it's sandblasted into the rock that surrounds this place, which means something very interesting, considering everything that I heard from the provost and from the chief guard, and everything that I saw that I've kind of written about and covered on Tumblr. If you want to read it, it's on lecture-notes.tumblr.com. You'll find it there. Is that we're dealing here with a prison that has based itself on a different zeitgeist. Very simply, it is based on a different point of departure for how to treat human beings in captivity. This isn't some vile, dark, cheap, vicious prison that's meant to punish people, as in inflict violence on already violent people. It is there to be nurturing, to be helpful, to be literally hard on crime, in the sense that you defeat and go for the root causes of what creates violent or antisocial behavior to begin with. And that's always been, to a great extent, environmental. I asked the provost a very important question, because this, for me, was going to be the absolute proof of whether I was looking at something that was based on this or not. And I said to him, look, this place cost 50 million to build. Why didn't you just build a cheaper prison and build several? Or why did you build it to this level anyway? And he said, and I have this recorded somewhere, and so I will transcribe it exactly at some point, but he said, if I may paraphrase, well, you can always build a cheaper prison. But the point is that when you build prisons that are like that, cheap and lacking in their nurturing capabilities, you create human time bombs. And then he said the following thing, which is extremely important. He said, and nobody counts the social cost of what these people do when they go back into society if they're not readjusted to it. If they're not going to be easily integrated back into society, the chaos they're going to cause, the violence they're going to cause, the crime that they're going to perpetrate is in fact also of some value, and this needs to be accounted for too. And that's exactly what we have spoken about in this movement with regard to violence, with regard to any social system, the evaluation of which must include not just monetary cost, but the cost to the society of it not functioning correctly. So I was extremely pleased with his answer. While I'm sure he wasn't quite sure why I was there, even though I did explain that I was, writing a sort of a free lecture that I was going to give out on social systems, including the prison, it is very interesting to see that the ground thinking is there, and that there are institutions out there that are involved in this kind of understanding and that do trace back to the root causes, social behavioral violence. Now, there's a couple of caveats here. It's not fair to compare this to every single other prison. The criminals that go to this prison are in for 18 months or less. They are usually not ultra-violent people. Those that are super violent are flagged as such when they come in. There's a sort of almost like a traffic light system that they use when they psychologically evaluate these people when they come in. The green ones they know are going to be fairly low maintenance. The orange ones they need to keep an eye on, and the red ones are the sort of suicide risk that they have to immediately treat in a different way. And he also told me that in the first night in any of those prisons, nobody sleeps alone, in the sense that they're not just left in some cell by themselves to sort of ruminate on their newfound home. Everybody has sort of, almost like how there are house parents when you go to a school, you get like a partner to sort of ease you into the process of joining a school. They have a similar kind of thing in that prison as well. Additionally, they have a weight room. They have a computer room for computer classes, so they can learn how to use desktop publishing and things like that, and basically learn new skills. They have language courses. They have psychotherapy courses. They have group counseling courses, and like I said, they have outdoor areas for walking that are still secure. They still have those. And they even have jobs as well. The prisoners are involved in working in various capacities. There's a company from Graz just down the road called Jolly that produce coloring pencils, and the prisoners order and pack these for them for I think it's €1.50 a day after a sort of a tax has been taken off for their well-being and all the rest of it. And they can use this in a shop that supplies cigarettes and sweets and other kind of elements that they need to earn to begin with. They also have a library there, very interestingly, and even though he admitted to me that most of these things aren't all that well used, at least they are there at the disposal of these prisoners, and that alone I think already has an effect. They have common rooms, table football, there are TVs, and I even got to go into one of the cells and meet one of the prisoners as well. And it's actually, once you've been past all of the self-locking doors and the multiple screen cameras, and you go into one of these cells, that you realize you're not in a holiday camp. You are in prison. You are under lock and key. You have been restricted in that sense. But at least it's not the kind of vile sort of area that's going to make you worse when you come out than when you went in. So that was very interesting. And that prison will form part of my lecture that I'll eventually get out on the different kinds of prison systems. I plan to see some in the UK. I'd love to go and see some in South America as well, but I really don't think I can make it over there. But overall, it's extremely important to go to these places and to actually witness firsthand, not just through books and and articles and periodicals, but to actually go and really try and understand any of the systems that we talk about. It's extremely important, and it's gonna start happening more as we start to foray out into the different areas and try and garner an understanding about what we can do to make this society less brutal, less violent, more successful in its endeavors to become more nurturing and better for everybody, because it's better for you if it's better for everybody. There was one question that I asked the provost that I was hoping for a different answer from than what he actually gave me, but the answer itself was actually better than what I was expecting. I'll explain what I mean. I said to him, look, is your reoffending rate, is your recidivism rate any better than the standard prison? And he said, well, studies have shown that it's not actually just the prison environment that helps reoffending rates, but it really is the environment that the prisoners go back to when they are finally released. And they go back to their old circles of friends. They go back to the environment they were in before. Many of the prisoners, he was explaining to me, were there on monetary grounds, debt grounds more specifically, which is viciously ironic considering everything that we talk about. Monetary crime is, one of the strongest, most predominant forms of crime that there is out there. Yet another reason to try and surpass a monetary system for a more peaceful world. And of course, when they're in prison, well, it's very hard to become employed once you come out of a prison, given the fact that you now have to state that you have been in prison before. So they have an extremely hard time finding a job, and they have debts, and they have their old circles of friends. What do you expect? You are fighting all possible odds for this kind of thing. And of course, I was really hoping, I suppose, in my sort of bias, that the recidivism rate would be incredibly low. But of course, the argument that's actually being made here is that it's the general environment anyway. It's everything in society that forms the behavior of a human being. It's everything that also permeates towards their success in that society. And so I then realized, of course, that I'd been thinking a little bit too shallowly at that point, and in fact, it's completely in line with what we talk about. In order to make a less violent society, it's got to be more productive on the outside as well as on the inside of a prison, in order to, really reduce crime at a root cause level. The reason these people even go into prison in the first place is because of the environmental factors that have contributed towards their behavior on the outside. In the same breath, I also asked him, look, do you see a fundamental trend to the backgrounds of any of these prisoners as they come in? I mean, they've all come in as, so-called criminals. They've come in because they've failed in their social endeavors and they've, perpetrated either violence or some kind of monetary crime against the system. Is there anything they have in common? And the provost was unflinching in saying, yes, they mostly come from broken homes. They mostly come from child abuse or from homes that were very violent or just fractured places of nurturing. And once again, we have it, you see that the buckling of the familial structure, again, can be placed directly in a social context. There's a reason why divorce rates are so high. They never used to be, and they are now. And that's, not completely worldwide, but the trend is there. And, that was also very important to realize, is that there is a root cause to this in the upbringing and nurturing of the human being within the family environment. A lack of love, as James Gilligan would say. And Gilligan and many others have also spotted this. Gabor Mate is another one who've spotted this. It's not even spotting, it's so obvious that this kind of root cause sits there. As I was leaving Leoben prison, having finished taking photos, which they also allowed me to do, and being led around the whole place, the provost also told me that there was actually a study that had been done comparing the sick time of guards with the sick time of guards in standard prisons. And what was very interesting was that the number of sick days taken per guard in Leoben is significantly lower than it is in other prisons. And that kind of hit me like a ton of bricks, because you don't really ever think of the guards, do you? You never think about the fact that they're human beings too, and that they should even be factored into how the prison runs. In fact, the chief guard had also said to me that one of the reasons why there was so much light and that there was so much openness and the ability to actually see distance in the prison, as opposed to being boxed into a room where you really can't see any distance for years at a time in a standard prison, is also a positive effect upon the guards as well. If you expect prison guards to behave well in a terrible environment, then you've forgotten that they're under the same environmental pressures as the prisoners themselves. And what worse way of looking after and trying to reorient a prisoner than to have a bunch of disorientated guards as well. So I found that very interesting. And, concurrently, I've also been looking at a book called The Lucifer Effect by a psychologist called Philip Zimbardo, who in the 1970s built a fake prison in Stanford. It was called the Stanford Prison Experiment, where he basically wanted to see what the effect of a prison environment was like on a control group. So to kind of factor out some of the preconditions that many criminals have, to see what it would do to normal people, if you like. And he enlisted many students and psychometrically tested them to make sure they weren't sociopathic or psychopathic or any of those kinds of predispositions, and tried a 2-week experiment where he turned a disused office area of a Stanford University basement into a sort of a mock prison with lockable doors and with rules and with visiting hours and with food times, and and the experiment collapsed after 6 days, during which there were behaviors that were very, very similar, not as brutal, but pretty brutal, and very, very similar to the Abu Ghraib or the other prison stories that we hear. Violence by the guards, needless forms of control and exercise, multiple lockings into their version of the hole or solitary confinement, which damaged some of these people almost beyond repair. They came out of this experiment that they knew was an experiment. They knew it was going to be 2 weeks. They knew it was not real. And they sank into their roles completely and were subsumed by their environment of sort of power and confinement. They, they even had their names taken away and they were assigned numbers instead. And so gradually, as this loss of humanity, this loss of personalization goes, it affects immediately all of the personal attributes that have been tied to that human being in the society that they've inhabited before. And it makes everybody worse. And there were people who had to opt out of that experiment very, very quickly. There was one guy who left, I think, after something like 4 days. He just couldn't handle it anymore. After 4 days. And he was getting paid to do that as well. So it's very, very interesting to see that this general structure of the prison system by itself has these effects, the panopticon effect, basically. The effect of being controlled, being watched, has a detrimental effect on the guards and the prisoners. And it was very refreshing to see Leoben Prison really taking a very different approach, and one that I think should definitely be scaled out to larger prisons. And in a sense, it sometimes has been done as well. James Gilligan writes as well of the Massachusetts prison system that he was looking after for 10 years, where before he arrived, there was one suicide a month. And during his tenure there, which I think was something like 5 or 7 years, or maybe even 10 years, the suicide rate dropped dramatically as he introduced forms of non-punishment, if you like. He brought in forms of reform and education and understanding, and levels of bringing in motivation and self-respect and value of the human being. The suicide rate dropped through the floor. Many people have recently been saying that the 1990s sort of self-respect movement in the kind of prison and violence talk didn't have any statistics to it. Most notably, recently, Steven Pinker has actually published a book this week where he says that we now live in the most non-violent time of all. Violence throughout history has only ever been decreasing. And while I've yet to read his book, and I'm going to, it strikes me that anybody who can say that we now live in a non-violent time, or a time that's at least much less violent than it was, is forgetting that we have 1 billion people starving on this planet. What kind of violence are you talking about? That's the most violent thing ever. 1 billion that are just going to die, and that 40,000 children die every single day from that. Is that not violence? Are we really just counting punches to the face? This is a false reorientation of the definition of violence to begin with. At least that's my initial impression. I will leave it to everybody and myself to evaluate Pinker's work. But from what I can see, there's some cherry picking going on here already. And if we talk about the self-respect movement not having any statistics, well, then I can only say that perhaps the countless works by Gilligan and the rest whom he cites, which are filled with statistics, at least in the periodicals I've read, there's plenty of statistics there, plenty of correlations between lowering the kind of punishment rate and increasing a sort of a feeling of self-respect and the understanding of where these causes come from, and the resulting decrease in violence against both the self in forms of self-mutilation and suicide and violence towards other prisoners on the external side, what we call behavioral violence. It's right there. So it was very instructive and very interesting. And like I said, I do urge everybody to, there's always a local prison somewhere, book in and go and see them. I've so far found no problems in going and having a talk. There's no reason why not. These places are institutions that should serve us, and they should be open to scrutiny too. And you can tell from how open Leoben was with me. They agreed to the interview straight away. They showed me around, all the rest of it. Those guys have nothing to hide because they stand by and understand and believe in the model that they have propagated. And you can tell they're proud of doing so as well. It's very, very interesting. And so that's enough on that one, I think. So that's almost it from me. If you want to support the Occupy movements in the areas where you are, each website for each one usually has a list of items that are requested or wanted or needed. Anything from food, clothing, gaffer tape, all kinds of things. They're usually listed on there. Go and have a look. If you feel so inclined, bring those things down. If not, just go and visit them anyway. They're gradually becoming tourist attractions anyway, which is very, very interesting. They're becoming something of note. So do see them while they're still around. They can't go on forever without something occurring, something happening, some kind of resolution. And, cover it, start to think about these ideas. Start having a look at the stuff that we talk about, the stuff that Occupy are talking about, what their demands are, and try and engage them in conversations about the movement or whatever, or just have a chat with them on a human level. They're very, very interesting people. When I was down at London, I met so many people who taught me some new things about what is actually possible, some of the technologies that are out there. So I walked away knowing much more than I had before. It's not just a matter of telling someone what you think. It's a two-way communication strategy, and these people are actually very informed, even though the media will say they don't know what their Occupy demands are, or they don't really know what's going on. It's actually not true at all. These are some of the most interesting people. They're not just a bunch of down and outs. So support them any way you can. It's a historic moment, and be sure to be on the right side of history with this one. So anyway, that's enough from me, and thank you to all of you people out there who keep spreading this message, who keep trying to fight for a better world. We're going to get there in the end, people, so I'll see you on the streets.